Welcome to the Building Sense for Life podcast. I'm Jacques Van Eeren, Financial Advisor and Director of NEMA. In each episode, I'll be joined by a guest as we explore key topics like insurance, investments, KiwiSaver, buying a home and estate planning. Together, we will unpack these subjects to help you build your financial sense and make informed decisions. Please note that this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended as financial advice.
Do you want to kind of just fill us in a little bit about like who you are, what you're doing, how you kind of got to where you are?
Yeah, cool. So I started Succession in 2024. I've been a practicing lawyer for 8 years. And I was quite general practice. So I covered estate planning, which is wills and enduring powers of attorneys. I did trust work, sale and purchase of properties, residential properties, relationship property, all of those sort of things that you deal with in a small town and that a lot of your clients need in all aspects of them. So, and as part of my journey and while I was practicing, I dealt with and saw a lot of people lose, somebody they love and then be faced with just can be a pretty horrific legal process. So they're already struggling. They've just lost one of the most important people in their lives. And then I'm coming in to tell them, this hasn't been drafted correctly, or, this is how, the way you owned your property means that we need to go down this path, and or there's no will in place, and then family disputes arise. We get into, very, lengthy and then expensive disputes. And yeah, so that sort of was my background. And I just felt like there's a lot of misinformation. And something I always struggled with when I was a lawyer as well was, to me, I'm like, if you just do it at the beginning and do it properly, it can make a huge difference at the other end. I think that was the biggest takeaway I had from it, is if you did it right at the start, it can make a world of difference to the people who have then just lost somebody really important to them and reduce, the potential of disputes and things like that. Like, I was even chatting to somebody yesterday and they were talking, their father had passed away and they have a stepmother and that relationship's just soured. And, over time, like, we all think everyone's relationships are going to stay great. But sadly, the reality is things happen when that key person holding everyone together is gone. It can make a big difference to the other relationships. I come at from a perspective of, trying to give really practical advice and say, how is this actually going to look? Is this actually going to be fit for purpose? What it is you're trying to achieve, or really what it is you are trying to achieve? What's the best way to do that? So that's sort of where I came from and why I wanted to start Succession, was looking at it from the start perspective, saying, right, how can we do this so it's better right at the beginning, not at the other end? And, a big thing for me was clarity on pricing. I always struggled, lawyers charge every 6 minutes and, you give somebody an estimate and then it, plus GST, office expenses, disbursements, and all of a sudden you get this, you get this big bill. And I've been on the receiving end of them and I'm like, oh my gosh. And, sometimes people are in a position where they could do that easily and that's fine. But there's also a lot of people who aren't. So a big thing for me in starting Succession was having fixed pricing. So you either want it or you don't. There's no like hidden cost. It's a fixed price. It's not an ongoing cost. It's not plus GST, plus GST
Yes.
and all those other things. It's an upfront price. So you know that going in, not going, hey, I'm going to get you started and then here's my bill.
Yeah. And I was expecting it to be $500 and it ends up being $1,500 because we had longer than necessary discussions or questions about things that needed to be sorted out, and just drags out.
Turns out you had a family trust, a blended family, you want to make all these gifts, you wanted to do, a life interest provision, all these other things that then just
so that's quite good. So you do set pricing no matter what the like family situation is or like kind of how complex it gets. You're just saying, well, this is it to get to the end point.
Yeah. So we have 2 different pricing structures, and that's where we have a quiz to help you work out what category you're in. So there's like a standard and then there is a more comprehensive, because some of them are substantially more comprehensive and need that far extra detail. But again, like, you're quite complex if you're getting in that category. I'm going to say like 98% of people will meet the standard criteria. So that's where I came from. So practicing lawyer for 8 years and then decided to go down a different route and start Succession, which is providing wills and drafting enduring powers of attorney for people. And it's all based online. So, there's no in-person meetings. You meet, but it's all via Zoom. So there's
how do
that
you-
one-on-one consult and advice given, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you find people, like I find nowadays, people are a lot more open to online meetings? Is that
Yeah.
something that you see as like,
Absolutely. Like I
Yeah.
have lots of people in their like late 50s, you know,
yeah,
jumping on
older
and joining
generation?
meetings. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Like they're equally as
I think
interested.
I think one of the benefits that I can see from, in my work is like if you need to talk to a husband and a wife, they can schedule a lunch time or at 2:00 or something, that they both can take a little bit of time out of the office and do the
Yeah.
stuff. Otherwise, it ends up being like it has to be at night, or it has to be, like when the kids go to bed or whatever, and it's everyone has like their complex lives outside of work. And if you can try and fit it in there, it makes life so much easier. And I think having to not drive somewhere, which can take an hour or whatever, like in Auckland, good luck. Having like a 1 hour meeting could be 3 hours.
Yes. So that was a big thing with me as well. I was like, so I have appointments in the weekends and evenings as well, because my whole mission was to make it as easy as possible for people to get rid of those roadblocks, like driving an hour in traffic, lining up the meeting with your partner, both having to take time off work, waiting reception for 15, 20 minutes, having your meeting, getting parking, driving home, getting a babysitter for the kids, whatever it may be. So that was my whole mission with Succession, was to make it as easy as possible. So it's online appointments, there's appointments at lunchtimes, but evenings, weekends. And if you both want to join from work, you can. You
Yes.
both just jump on the call from your respective locations. Like I've met with people where it was a husband and wife, and the husband worked in Australia, but we just did our meeting at a time that suited them, our time zone, his time zone. But they could both be present in the conversation. They're both contributing.
Because that's something important, right? Like they need to be together.
Oh gosh, there's no way you'd take instruction from, hey, I'm just going to do a will for my husband.
Or you have to double up.
Terms.
You have to do one on this side and then kind of talk to them, and then you still have to kind of go back or like re-explain stuff, I think.
Yes, exactly. And you want them engaging with each other as well. So when people book an appointment with us, following that, they get sent what we call like a will questionnaire, which is like an online form that both parties, if it is a couple doing it together, will fill out, which prompts conversations between them as well. Because often I found as well, you would waste so much time if you just went into a meeting and you're just having all this preliminary conversation, which they need to go away, think about, talk about between themselves, and then come back. For me, I find with people completing that online questionnaire before the appointment, they have conversations together that they may never have had. It can be some pretty, it's a heavy topic.
And people
often
avoid that topic at all costs.
Like nobody wants to talk about that at all. So I find that really helpful, because it's turning people's minds and encouraging conversations, especially between couples, and even not couples, like even between if you've just got children and no partner, or, parents or siblings, like you're having those conversations when you're coming in. So you're a little bit more informed when we actually sit down. And I find then our conversation is way more productive.
Yes.
And they've turned their mind to it. Generally, I'm going to say 99% of the time, there will, because I'll do a draft will based off their questionnaire and the information they've provided. And then I'll flag all my points that I want to go over with them, what I don't think is practical, or where I think they need to add something in. And then during our meeting, it changes. I'm going to say 100% of the time it's changed from the initial draft based off our conversation, and then going, oh, I didn't think of that, or, I never really thought beyond this point. So yeah, that was a big thing for me as well.
Yeah. I think like people, and I find this with insurance as well, is people don't want to have those conversations and like the what ifs. And it's hard to think of, if my partner's not here, how does life go on? And it's like, I'd rather not think about that.
Yeah.
But, like what you say, it's like preparing in the beginning and making sure that you kind of have all of that stuff in place means that if that does happen, and none of us want that to happen, right?
Yeah.
Is that at least you're prepared and you know what's happening. If you then have to scramble, you're already under emotional stress and there's a lot of stuff going on in your life already, to then try and sort out going through probate and not having a will, and then having to like go to the courts, and you've got someone else who says, well, I actually should have been getting this and they promised me that, and are you trying to fight that? And that relationship breaks down because you thought this person would never do that, and now they're doing this, and like, how can they do that to you? And it just causes so much conflict.
Yeah.
And just getting that stuff sorted earlier makes makes life a lot easier.
It's so hard to put it into words, hey, and I think I'm really grateful, even on my social media, I'll have people go, leave comments and share their experience, vouching, saying this happened to me. It was horrible, They didn't have a will in place and it was drawn out and it was really expensive, and had they had something, it would have been a quarter of the price, time and cost and things like that. It's hard to articulate to people until you've actually experienced it, what you can be saving someone by just having something there in case something happens, and I think that's,
and I think it doesn't have to be like super complicated, right?
No.
It's just like, it just needs to have at least some of your wishes and like kind of put down in a formal document. As opposed to, doesn't have to be to the nth degree, right? Like,
no, and that's the thing, we don't
need.
Although some people do the ring, but I'm like, we don't need to worry about your t-shirts and your, pots and pans. Like, we don't need to get to that detail.
Yeah.
But we can cover off the important things. But I just think so many people bury their head in the sand. And I've seen so many times where people talk about it or half attempt to do it. And I'm like, if you're going to do it properly, because I can guarantee, like, even when I was practicing, I'd see things come across and I'm like, this is just ripe for dispute. You can sign this off right now and you're like, I've kind of ticked the box, but I can guarantee, because we haven't covered A, B, C, they're going to turn into arguments, So you try and take that really proactive approach at the beginning to say, okay, if something happens, what does that look like? And how can we make that as easy as possible for the people who are going to be grieving and struggling, and not have them focusing on things and not dealing with things that they don't actually need to be, because you've actually done something. You've taken one step that changes their whole journey.
Yes, I fully agree. So, I mean, I sit on the same side of the fence, I think, in terms of insurance and people seeing, like, if they don't have it in place, that they don't have it structured properly, because you can structure insurance incorrectly too. And it goes into a will and then it's in probate and it takes ages, and like not having that stuff set up properly in the beginning also creates vast amounts of issues. And I've helped with death claims and stuff like that before, and it's not pretty, and you like kind of see the devastation that's left behind. And like, if things aren't clear and articulate as to about how things are going to go and progress from there, it makes life very complicated. Like, the one I'm thinking of is a lady, her husband died basically within a couple of weeks. He got diagnosed with cancer, was very aggressive, had a really big company, and they didn't really sort all this stuff out. And he died, and I went and spoke to her about the insurance side of things, and she was like, look, Jacques, I don't actually know what to do with the business now and how this is going to go forward. We've got all these contracts, but I've never really worked in the business. Like, I kind of help out a little bit, but it's not. And so that was like such a big stress over her on top of everything else. And it was just because there was no pre-planning or thinking about how they were going to deal with that if that ever happened. And it's unfortunate, it's heartbreaking, and it's like tough to see someone in such a
do now. It's just
it's hard to see someone in such a tough emotional state dealing with something that's now putting like so much more emotional stress on them, which probably could have been sorted if they just thought about it and done a few extra steps. So
turn their mind to that.
So what, in terms of wills, like, what do you think is one of the biggest mistakes people make when it comes to wills?
I think a lot of people draft a will not realizing that this document's actually going to be read. I think a lot of, because I get people all the time like, I can do a free will or I'll just write it myself. And I'm like, cool. Because I guarantee that that's going to cost, 10 times as much as if you'd just gone and paid for professional advice in the beginning. Like, I think a lot of people don't attribute value to the document. I think we all struggle to recognize our own mortality, that actually one day we all have to pass away, and that this document's actually going to be read. Some people, if that, there is some people will turn their mind to it and think, I've done something and I've ticked that box, and then that
I've
can
done
create.
Enough. It's good. So I can take it off the list.
Yeah, like I was just thinking of one where like they brought like a Whitcoul's book, and you can get like a pre-written will. they did that, and the person passed away, and as a husband had passed away, the mum was, sole mum, kids struggling, they were in their 40s. She was grieving and was like, here's our will. And I'm like, cool. The will had 2 different dates on it. So you're then having, and so you've got a will, you're like, cool, I've done it. But it's like, well, no, because there's 2 different dates. So the court say, because when you have a will, you send it to the court, and the court give you like a stamp saying, yep, that will is approved, which is what we call probate, and then they go away and administer it. So if you've got a will and it's smooth, you apply for probate, you get it, and you carry on. But in that instance, no, probate's rejected because there's 2 different dates. We need a clear date. So then, as a lawyer, somebody's having to draft affidavits to explain what is the correct date. You need supplementary evidence to prove what date was signed. You're getting the witnesses of your wills back in, like all of these.
Yeah.
All starts, and you're like, gosh, like if you'd just done it right from the beginning.
Yeah, it would have been so much easier.
So much easier.
I know I spoke to a lawyer ages ago, and he was saying, even if you got like one of those DIY wills and you put the papers together and you stapled it, and you're like, oh shit, it's in the wrong order, and then you take the staple out and you restaple it, like, well,
you're then having to file an affidavit, to explain why was it unstapled, was there anything missing, like even a paperclip. So like if you've set your will and you've like paperclipped something on it and there's a paperclip mark on the will, then you'll be having to like write an explanation to the court as to why there's a paperclip on there. Was there actually something that's meant to be formed part of this will that's now been removed? Like, it turns into such a night. There's so many examples. Like I remember when I was practicing, the will was drafted 20 years ago, and then it was sent to the children to make the application for probate. Would have been fine, but when the kids received it, they were meeting with a JP or somebody to witness their signature for the application for probate, and they noticed on the will that their dad's name was spelt wrong. So they just drew all over the original will, and I'm just like, because then
was
so
that in
much
front of
more
the JP?
pays. I don't actually know, but it came back, and I was like, did you read the instructions which says do not mark the, like if that's an issue, let somebody know. Also, you can deal with that without, as soon as you put a pen mark on, and then, they were fee conscious, and I'm like, well, you cause a situation yourself that's out of our hands. We have to now address this with the court. You don't get the option to just go. So I think that's one is, people just thinking, I've got a will, it'll be fine, and not actually being the case. And also, I think a lot of people think they don't need them. Like, I think that's probably the biggest actually misconception is I don't have enough. Like, I'll have people who come up to me and say, oh, I need a will, but I don't really have much. And like this person had their own business, they owned their own home, and had 3 children. I'm like,
wow.
You know the threshold is,
it doesn't even matter anything else, right?
Yeah.
Who do you want to look after the kids?
Like, I'm like, and I think a lot of people think because they've got debt, it means they don't have much. And it's like, well, generally your assets outweigh your debt. That's how it works. Generally. You shouldn't be getting lending or putting yourself into that position if you can't meet it. And I suppose there is housing prices drops and all those things that might occur in the next little while. But generally you've got equity if you own a property. But I think that's probably the biggest misconception is people not realizing that it is the threshold and thinking, like I have a lot of people who are in a relationship say, we own everything together. But I've had so many situations where it's like, no, we own everything together. And I'm like, cool, KiwiSaver can't be owned together.
Yep.
First off.
Straight off the bat.
Yeah. And also heaps of people will swear to me, black and blue, no, we own this property jointly, and you'll do a title search and it's owned tenants in common. And that little ownership, like you say at the beginning, like even with insurance, knowing your ownership structure, so many people actually don't know who owns their policy or how the property's owned. They see both of their names, we own it. And that makes a big difference when somebody passes, because if it's jointly, it passes to the other person by way of survivorship. Just like when you've got an insurance policy, if it's joint or on each other, when that person gets it, you get it straight away.
Yep.
If it's you own the policy on yourself or you own the property as tenants in common, half share each, then it gets dealt with in accordance with your will. Or if no will, the Administration Act. So that's, it makes and that means, they're now delayed. Like I had a situation, the couple were in their mid to late 80s, or at least mid 80s. Husband passed away and thought, oh, it'll be nice and simple. No, property was owned, tenants in common. Don't know why. They've been together since they were, in their 20s, children of the relationship. Sometimes people, I think, did it potentially for residential care and things like that. But anyway, it was owned, tenants in common, and there was a year where probate itself, despite having a will, probate itself was taking 8 months through the court. And
that's a long time to be waiting to find out.
Before you can even start the process. So she was in a position where it was a huge home, and she was now on her own. She just wanted to move on. I want to close this chapter. I want to list the property. I want to downsize. I want to do all these things. You couldn't even engage a real estate agent. You're not, you haven't had the property transferred to you as the executor of the will. Something that should have been really simple, ended up taking, I think, a year and a half. The court is now saying it's far better, and it's taking about 6 weeks to get probate, which is really good.
That's good improvement.
Sometimes things happen and it's outside, and I think a lot of people forget that even with a will, it could take 8 months. Hopefully not, but sometimes that happens and it's out of everyone's control, and you have to go with it. And that's where your life insurance policies can be a huge difference for somebody if they've lost somebody.
To have that money there and access to it. To have that
straight away, they're not panicking about how they're going to pay the mortgage, how they're going to pay the kids' school fees, how they're going to cover the bills for the month.
How they're going to pay the funeral expenses.
All of those things, they can actually just focus on what's important in that moment for them. And that's, getting through, dealing with that loss and, helping, your children, if you've got children or whatever it may be, without all those extra burdens that come in addition.
If you've got life insurance and it's paid out, 8 months waiting for probate's probably not going to be an issue. You at least have, and if you have money in the bank, you can always talk. If you need to do something with your mortgage, you can talk to the bank. You can say, hey, I've got this, but this is what we're waiting for. It just gives you so much more flexibility and negotiating power. But if you don't have anything, and all of a sudden everything that you own is tied up, you're kind of stuck until you're at the whim of the courts and other people, and they making decisions, and you have absolutely no ability to really make any changes to that. So it's very, in terms of fees around probate and stuff, I know that's obviously not what you're dealing with, but is there any advice or thoughts that you have around that? Because I know some companies or businesses charge per thing that they're doing, and there are other will providers out there that they basically take a percentage of the value,
which is a big shock. I think a lot of people are unaware of that when they're signing up to those wills, is going, oh, this seems cheap, or
and then
free.
And then 10 or 20% of the value of your estate is getting given to someone, and you're well, what the fuck is happening?
And you don't realise, because you passed away, it's your family that complain and go, what the heck, and why did you do this? But I think a lot of people sign up to them not actually understanding that that's going to happen. I think
that's the end point.
I have so many people go, well, it's free, and I'm like, nothing's free. There is always,
you are the product if it's free, right? That's
there is always a cost, so just be aware, err on the side of caution. And I, have people, and I'm like, my job, I'm not here to say do it through me. Go do it through whoever you like. I'm here to, to help people who want to do it through me, who see the value in the, the experience I hold, and can help guide them, or who resonate with me. But I'm like, by all means, if you were like, oh, I need one, and I'm going to go see Jim down the road, go see Jim. As long as I've helped you take that step and recognize that actually what you taking that proactive step is going to make a difference. That's, the main thing that I care about.
And you're making an active, you're not just talking about it.
Role.
You're kind of getting there. If it's you or me or anyone else, it doesn't matter. You've kind of taken that step, and that's, and I think it's the same in insurance, sometimes people don't want to work with you because you don't gel, or they don't like something you've said, or whatever it might be. But that's okay. As long as you go get that insurance somewhere else, you've spoken to me, you go speak to someone else, and you get something, that's great. That's
you've
better
still got
than
something out of that interaction, in terms of you've gained knowledge from you or I, and what you do with that. As long as you're taking a proactive step from that, I think that's, that's really cool.
Yeah, that's the magic end goal. Because I think, I think we had this little chat yesterday about the perception that people have of of us.
Yeah.
And that, like as an insurance advisor, that your whole goal is just to sell something. And I kind of thought that you wouldn't get that being, in the lawyer or the legal space, because like I find that people think advisors are there just to sell something, and because you're going to get a commission out of it, like your interests are not aligned with theirs, right? But as an advisor, you see people dealing with cancer diagnosis, you see people dying, like these are things you talk about all the time, and it's part of your daily life, and you see the effects it has on people. So sometimes when you can be a little bit rough with people, and not rough, but you can kind of just be a bit more blunt with them, they think you're just trying to like crack them on to say like you should take this policy, but it's not really the case. And I think you said yesterday you find something very similar.
Yeah, I have so many comments being like, what are you getting out of this? And I can't believe you're charging for this. And I'm like, I'm not going to go to your workplace and ask you to do whatever it is that you do and give it to me for free. I have a set of skills. I'm, believe it's very reasonably priced. I'm upfront with the pricing. I'm not trying to trick you, but I have value that I'm going to add. If you want to take that and pay for that, great. If you don't, cool, go elsewhere. But, so many people are like, what is your commission? And I'm like, I'm doing a job. Of course I'm going to get paid for that job, and I don't feel bad about that. I'm telling you the price up front, and, I'm providing a service that you're going to need. And I think, the same with insurance. It's like, it's not coming from a place of, I'm not getting a cut of your estate. There's no actual benefit outside of the
fee
front, the fee that you're paying. I've seen, and I think you're the same, you see the other end where people don't have these things in place and how devastating and crumbling that can be. And that's where we're stepping in, is we're trying to be the front people to say, we can, we can't change the circumstances. Gosh, both of us hope, those things don't happen. And unfortunately for me, one of those things have to happen. But
yes,
you can change somebody's experience if that event occurs. And I think, that's why we're doing it, is you're coming from a place where if you do these things that we're suggesting is going to make that person's or somebody's experience completely different than if you don't take these steps.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's hard because, I think when you've kind of seen the stuff that we have, you understand and you buy into it so much that if someone doesn't really get it, you like, I don't really get frustrated with a person, but I get frustrated with the process of like trying to be like, hey, I'm not actually trying to do anything else but to help you. Yeah. Like my role is advisor, right? So like I'm a financial advisor, and I take the advisor part of that very seriously. Like I'm here to educate you, to talk to you, answer your questions, and whatever the outcome of those three things are, and we kind of get to a point, that's where we implement the solution to kind of answer those questions. And whether that is no insurance, well, great. Like we've at least had the conversation. Yeah. If it's we need to get this much insurance, well, then that's also okay. And it's the same for you. It's like, you get so invested in like trying to get people to understand that there are actually massive consequences if you don't do this stuff. Yeah. And so, like I've seen this. Have you seen this, or have you thought about it? Because you don't want to think about it. Yeah. It's quite tough. So yeah, I think it's interesting.
Have you heard the comment? I get not well enough that, I don't care, I'll be dead anyway. And I'm like,
yes.
Honest, my response is like, do you like anybody? Like, because if you like a single person in this world, then you should care. Like, if you've got no friends, no family, not one person in this entire world that you would say, I like you, then like, cool, by all means, good for you. Sad that you live a life like that. But I just think that's such a cop-out of an answer. And I'm just like, honestly,
I've had that answer with couples.
Yeah.
Like the husband sitting there and he says, I don't care because I'll be dead. And the wife's like, oh my God, like, what do you mean? Yeah. And she's freaking out internally because she's like, well, why are you saying this? Like, we need to sort this out. And like, all of a sudden you are now just like downplaying, like if you die. Yeah. Like, and I think a lot of it's a coping mechanism.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I feel like it's a coping mechanism.
It's like they don't emotionally know how to deal with the fact that they might die. And so they say, well, I don't care because I'm dead. Yeah. Like it's not my problem. But actually it is your problem. Yeah. And if you're taking your role and like your family or your situation seriously, you should be saying like, actually, we need to make sure this is all in place because I don't want to have a situation where you guys don't have a roof over your heads or the kids don't know where they're going or
you're like, forced to sell the house because we can't keep, all of those things. Yeah.
Well, because there's also like, I think we all always think of one person dying.
Yeah.
But there's also
I
a
know.
couple can die.
Yeah.
And that's
I say
it's
that
such
all
a
the
big
time.
thing.
Everyone's like, well, they'll be there. And I'm like, yeah, but like not necessarily. Like sometimes, things can happen.
Yeah.
And then, right, who's going to be the guardian of your children? Who's going to pay for bringing up your children? Are there sufficient assets to do that while you then, if you're wanting to leave your assets to them, okay, but who's going to then cover the cost of raising them for the next, do you have surplus assets to do that? Or, I think that's a big conversation,
and like,
if
what do you
something
want that
happens
to
to
look
you.
for? Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, how are you going to fund these things? Have you thought about it? Like, how are they going to access it? When do they get to access it? Like, because you almost like from the grave, you want to teach them some stuff around, like, I don't want to just give you $1 million and then you squander it, and so you're going to be saying like, hey, I actually want them to access this money, but they can only access the full amount at a certain age or, whatever. But like, those are things that you need to pre-plan. If you're not pre-planning, then it's just going to happen, and all of a sudden someone's got like $1 million and your kid doesn't really know what to do with that. I think one of the things you see when someone gets a lot of money like that, everyone comes knocking.
Yeah.
Saying
not
like,
even
hey,
$1 million, honestly. It's so much less than that. Yeah.
50,000.
Yeah.
People are saying like, hey, can
Amazing.
I get access to that? And like, so what are you doing if it's your kids that are then in that situation? What are you doing to shield them from other people trying to misappropriate the money, right? Like, not intentionally, but they're saying, hey, can you lend me 10 grand? It's not a big deal. I pay you back. They don't have the emotional / financial understanding to make good decisions about that. And I think that's where things can go awry very quickly. And like, as two people that pass away together, it does happen, and you can't just discount it and say, well, it's not going to happen to me, because dying soon is also not going to happen to you, but you still need to plan for it.
There was it was in New Zealand. It was a few years ago now, but it was, husband and wife and twin babies, and the husband and wife passed away in a car accident and the twin babies survived, and they were, they weren't one, they were babies. And I'm like, while we all hope it doesn't happen, it does happen sometimes. And in that case, have you actually turned your mind to that, to say, a lot of people expecting a child, the last thing they're thinking about is something happening to one of them or even both of them. But I'm like, you want to have that say. And I have a lot of those conversations in terms of, who do you want to appoint as your testamentary guardian, the person that is going to step in and, be your voice. Because if you don't say it, the court's then deciding, and you don't like your mother-in-law. Do you really want her raising your children for the next all those things? Like, you don't say, then the person that you're going absolutely not them might end up being that person. You don't get to say. You've missed your opportunity. So I think
are you happy to take your hand fully off the steering wheel if you die, and that the vehicle that they're in is just going to go whichever direction it chooses? Yeah, that's kind of where you're putting it. If you get a will in place, at least there's one hand on the wheel that says this is the direction we should be going in. And I think that's like so important for people to like grasp. It's so important.
And when you're making your will, is like appointing that person who's going to manage those finances on the behalf of your kids until they get 25.
Yeah,
is that person really appropriate, your friend, or are they going to dip into that? Yes, your kids might be able to hold them liable, and it's illegal to do that, but sometimes that happens. And if do you need two people there to cross-check and sign off so that it reduces that risk? It's all of those conversations that I think are so important. And a lot of people going, oh, I'll appoint this person as guardian, and I'm like, they're your friends. Like, are they really? Like, let's not try and be.
Well, also, have you had that discussion with your friend to say, hey, if I die,
real conversation,
are you happy?
Not just
are you happy for
drink.
my kid or my kids to come to your house and live there? Like, I can put away a certain amount of money, and it's going to look like this. Is that something that you're willing to take? Because maybe like they're still in the early stages and they might have another kid, and then there's situation, and then now you appointed them as a guardian, you haven't spoken to them, and all of a sudden the court's like, well, Jacques said
and
you should be the guardian.
I don't want to be, and then you
and then it's all screwed up. So, and like having that conversation with people that should be the guardian,
so important.
Is so important. Like, you can't just make that decision.
No, even people looking at their parents as well. And I'm like, but how old are your parents? Like, let's actually talk about this realistically. Like, are they the most appropriate person? And sometimes they are, don't get me wrong. But other times I'm like, you look at their age right now, if they were going to start again. And yes, so many parents will be like, absolutely, like, of course I'm going to do that. But you're like, is that actually going to be the best life for your child? As well, it's actually getting people to think about it a bit more in depth. I think a lot of people go, oh, just this person, without really, because they don't want to think about it. They're, kind of, but, not really thinking about it in detail and actually going, but if this actually happens, what does that actually look like? And is that actually appropriate?
Yeah, and like you could say, like if it's your parents, right? So your parents might be in their mid-70s at the time you draft the will, and you die 10 years later. Now they're 85.
Yeah.
And are you saying, well, these kids have to go live with their 85-year-old grandparent who, you've got 10-year-old kids, 12-year-old kids. Yeah. They're busy. And I've got 2 kids. I've got a 3-year-old and an 8-month-old, and it's way busy, so, try and put that into, like for someone who's in that age bracket, like, is that something that's really a good position to put them into? And potentially they might not be around either.
Yeah, so I always encourage that as well, having the backup, saying if something's happened to that guardian, then who do I want to step in, so at least you've outlined your order. And people know, because a lot of people I find as well, they go, any one of these people. And I'm like, don't do that, because you're then giving them something to fight over, because you haven't articulated who. And what happens out of these 4 people that you've named, 2 or 3 of them really want, think they're the most appropriate person. They're now fighting with each other,
Yeah. And if you've got siblings, then maybe it gets split up because one sibling goes and lives with one person, and hopefully not, but like it could happen,
Yeah. Ideally not. I don't think the court would be so keen on issuing that.
But like, it's...
You need to say, and I think it's not fair on them for you to say any one of these people. I'm like, no, you need to articulate and say this person, if not this person, then this person in that situation, because that's not fair.
Make the decision, right? Because if you're leaving the decision to later, it's just going to complicate everything for everyone. Yeah. In terms of guardians, because I'm from South Africa originally, been here a long time though, but I always think about immigrants, and with guardianship for kids, that's more complicated, right? Like, if you still, like, most of your families in South Africa, like, there's totally different legal systems in terms of how that works. Like, how do you kind of navigate that?
It's really good conversations, and that's where I encourage them to have that conversation and go, if your family's over there, are you okay with your children going there? Are you okay that your children won't grow up here? And if that's, yes or
Bearing
no.
in mind, a lot of people are coming here because they want to get away, like in terms of South Africa, it's like to get away from South Africa, not necessarily to send their kids back there. They're making huge sacrifices for essentially their kids, and then having a situation where you could have your kids go back. Like, I think that's always something that immigrants don't really think about, I've found, is when it comes to guardianship of your whole family unit is here, you don't have any other family in New Zealand. But what happens with those kids? Do they go back to the Philippines? Do they go back to wherever? Like, is that India, South Africa, like whatever your home country is, like, but how do you deal with that? And you need to have that conversation. And I think it's even more complicated than just having kids here and like your family's here, that you can say, hey, like, I can send you to so-and-so, but, and they're happy to take you.
Yeah.
Like, let's tack that on.
Yeah.
But I think it's always like a very interesting thing. And I found with dealing with immigrants that they never think of that there's lots of ramifications to not thinking about that. There's different legal systems, and like, how does it work? And like, are you 100% sure that this is what you want?
Yeah. I think, that's so true. Even outside of, even if you don't have children and you've got family overseas, people talk, my mum's even in the UK, I'll appoint her as my executor. And I'm like, that's going to cost you a lot of money. Like, I can guarantee that that's going to cost far more than if you if you're wanting it to go to your mum, that's great. Make her the beneficiary. But I don't actually think they should be the executor. And it's all this information that I think a lot of people just struggle to realize that's where, things can go substantially wrong, because in New Zealand, even with a will, you still need the original will when you apply for probate. And if your mum's in the UK, you're couriering an original will to the UK to get witnessed by a notary, to then come back, and then your, different time zones, all those type of things, they're needing your mum as the executor over in the UK to, like, is that practical? Because I would say no. If you want it to go to your mum, great, but that's a completely different question than who should be your executor.
Yeah, who should be making those decisions? And like, if your mum lives in the UK does she understand the nuance of New Zealand and how that works, and like how, if it's around kids or distributions of stuff, how is that going to affect decisions that you're making here? Because you're thinking of your home country and like how it works there, and it's always different, right? So, and also like, you're going to fly out and do all the stuff here? Like, I mean, okay, do you have money set aside in your will, or like in some other way for them to get here, or like, it's very, very, lots of considerations to make with that.
I see feel like a lot of parents go, I just want to put all my kids there, and I'm like, don't. Like, I can tell you right now, you don't need all 4 kids listed as the executor, because they think they're trying to be fair, and I'm like, it's a job. It's not like a, oh yay, I'm an executor. Like it's not like, yay, I got picked. Like, you don't get anything for it. That's not, an executor is not a paid role unless it, it is stated that it's a paid role, declared when you're doing your free will that they're then getting 20% of your estate or whatever it may be. But generally you're not getting paid. You're just there. And most people are also beneficiaries, so they do get that interest at the other end. But I'm like, you don't need all 4 people there to just make it fair. Like, that's just going to create more issues, delay times, because everyone's signing off, everyone's got to do everything. Like, make them all 4 beneficiaries, great, but save yourself.
I think you also run into like arguments. I think that's the thing you want to try and avoid at all costs, right? Is like, if you've got 4 kids and all of them are executors on their estate, like how are they going to be discussing, because they're all going to have their own vested interest into what they want to happen now. And so they're all going to fight, and they're all going to have different opinions, and you're going to have 2 ganging up on the other 2 or whatever. And then what ends up happening is just like family meltdowns because of money and like how things should be distributed. And if you have 1 person or 2 people, that's a lot easier to not screw up. And like, they've made a decision, they're executing the will as it's stated. But
I think that's equally as important when it comes to EPAs and property, appointing all 4 kids when it comes to the property management. It's like, oh gosh, don't, like, put the person who's good at property management there in that role. You can let them consult or give information to the other siblings to make them feel included, but put the person who's most practical in that role. Look at it for what it is and how it's going to, do your job right by actually making those decisions rather than making a breeding ground for potential fights between.
I mean, like, if you have someone who's not really keen on doing any kind of admin stuff or being on a computer, why would you make them an executor or like on an EPA? Because it's not what they want to do. So like, you're putting them in a situation that's uncomfortable for them to start off with, and then it's just they have to make these decisions, and then they get stressed out, and it just goes sideways. So
I had one recently, couples, and they were doing EPAs, and the husband appointed the wife, but the wife didn't appoint the husband for property management because they're not practical to do that. They're not on the computer paying the bills, and all of those type of things that they're like, the wife is fine to step in because that's, she can handle that. But she was like, why would I appoint him when, he's just going to try and get the girls to do it anyway? So I'd better to just appoint my children, because he's not in that position to actually, because he doesn't take on that role. He doesn't do online banking and all those other things.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's brave, because a lot of people will just appoint each other thinking we're husband and wife, that's what we need to do. Going, actually, is that actually going to be appropriate?
Practical.
Or
That's what it is all about. Wow, it's a very fascinating side of the whole, from an insurance point of view. Like, the world side of things is the very end point, and like it's we deal with that somewhat, and that we ask the question and generally try and get people in that direction. But it's good to have this discussion, because like I can't really necessarily have this discussion with clients and talk to them and say, hey, well, these are things you should think about, because I'm not allowed to some degree. It's to alert them to it, and then say, go speak to somebody who's seen the ins and outs of it, who can actually give you that. Like, I can alert you to things that you turn your mind to, but that's not, your area of expertise, whatever. Like, I'm not going to go tell somebody, this is what policy you need placed. This is what you need to turn your mind to. Like, if you pass away, can you cover the mortgage? Can you keep paying, the upbringing of your children? Are you going to be okay? If not, no, okay, well, you need to go speak to somebody to talk about how you're going to be in a position if, something like that happens to you. Yeah. So, in terms of like reviewing your will, like
Yeah.
how often are you, like, do you suggest people do it, or are there good trigger times for people to think about this kind of thing?
Fun fact and random fact, in New Zealand, if you had a will but then got married, it cancels your will. So I think a lot of people don't know that unless it was made in contemplation of marriage. So there's like a little caveat there, whereas like you might have prepared your will and you're engaged and you're sitting there planning your wedding. So what you do in that instance is you put in a provision to say this will is made in contemplation of my marriage. You say it's not conditional on that marriage taking place in case you sign your will and then a week before the wedding something happens. Also cancels it. So you can do that. But a lot of people I've spoken to in sort of my age bracket where they had a will in place because they bought a property or whatever, but then subsequently have got married. And I said, they did their will well before they was even thinking about getting married. So, I've said, oh, do you have a will? And they say, yep. And I'm like, oh, was it made in contemplation of marriage? And they're like, no, like we weren't even together at that point or whatever it may be. And I'm like, cool, you don't have a will. So that's a really good trigger
You've got
date.
a document, but like you don't,
but it's not worth
mean
anything.
Yeah.
Rip that up.
Yeah.
So that's a really good trigger date. If you've done it pre-children, obviously having children, and I think, as your children get older, so I think, babies is very different. Like you said, guardianship, a baby versus, 10 years old can be quite different as well. So I think, pre-marriage is like if you've done it and it's you, and then if you've got married, obviously post-marriage, unless it was drafted with that coming into mind. Children is another trigger date.
And would that be each child, or is that
no? Well,
just
I
for
wouldn't.
one?
So I would draft a will, and some people might. Don't know. It depends on who you're getting, I guess, at the other end, whether they're drafting it specific. But if I'm dealing with somebody, and I even account for it with couples who think they might have children, so I draft it saying, right now they don't have any children, but if I pass away and I do have children, we've covered that off. So I think that's also important to know for people is, you don't have to wait till you've had children or how many you're going to have or whatever it is. If you're thinking about starting a family, then we can cover that off, Yeah.
So don't wait until you have a child and then say, actually, now I need a will.
Yeah, you can do it now and you can account for if you've got children, and then we just have another provision which says if I don't have any children, this is what it looks like. So you can cover all of those situations. And I think that's, important. And I also think once your children get older, like a lot of people have done their wills when their kids might have been babies or teen years, and now their children are, in their like mid to late 20s, early 30s. At that point, I'd be going, probably at that point your siblings were the backup executors and things like that, and I'd be saying get them off and put your kids on. They don't need to be doing that anymore and all of those type of things. And generally when you're getting to that point as well, you can sort of draft a will, if your circumstances aren't changing drastically, where it is going to be there for the next 30, 40 years, because, you've got your each other, if not each other, your children, and then if not your children, grandchildren and things like that. So you can sort of do a more like quite a longevity structure there. But I think they can always be changed. A lot of people are trying to think so far ahead, and I'm like, you draft a will for the here and now. If something happened tomorrow, this document needs to be practical. You can always update it, and I think, realistically, we can drop $2,000 in an iPhone and get maybe 4 years out of it these days, and, we don't even blink twice, and we're okay with that. But it's changing your perception of value, I think, is a big thing for people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be my...
value.
Yeah.
Long-term value, yeah. Because we're very much in the, what do we get today? We pay $1,000, but we get the brand new iPhone.
Yeah.
But paying $1,000 or whatever it might be for a will, and then what's a document?
Yeah.
That I'm never going to look at again, hopefully.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to have to pay something again to get updated. I mean, insurance is very similar in that way, but people don't see the long-term value of it, right? So.
Yeah. So they would be my trigger dates. And like as soon as you've got assets, like I think I've met a lot of people who go, I don't have anything, and they've got KiwiSaver, and I'm like, but you've got KiwiSaver. Like I'm not in a relationship or whatever, and I'm like, honestly, just put it, like do a one, your will doesn't have to be, no wills are generally 20 pages, but do you know what I mean? Like just make it simple and appoint mum or dad or both of them, but probably just one of them. Appoint mum to go get it, get access to it, and then appoint mum and dad if it is that situation as the beneficiary. That $650 or $500 or $1,000, whatever it may be, is going to be far, cheaper than if you just choose nothing and then let mum or dad to go sort it out in the event something happened to you.
Yeah. Yeah, And with KiwiSaver becoming such a big part
Yeah.
of, everyone's asset base.
Yeah.
And people don't think about KiwiSaver as an asset.
Yeah.
It's just this thing that I put money into and I don't really check it. And then, do I have enough for retirement or not? But the thing is, it's still yours. It's still like whether you use it at 65 or you die before that, something has to happen to it. It's money that's yours.
Yeah.
That you've paid in there that needs to go somewhere. Definitely. And I guess also the other thing is around the more, I guess, shitty side of life where people divorce and
yes I was going to say separations.
I
have so many. So when I was practicing, I dealt with separations a lot. Like that was something I did a lot of, and so many people just didn't have the mental capacity to do it when they were separating. So because separating can be a real emotional roller coaster, and when there's, even without kids, but with kids, it can become unintentionally, or who knows, sometimes intentionally, where it becomes a manipulation tactic. It gets drawn out, somebody's not quite ready to let go, so they try and hold control where they can, and all. So the person can sometimes be exhausted and decision fatigued and go, I'm sitting there going, right, we need to update your will, and they go, I literally can't think about that right now.
Yeah. But do you want your ex-partner to get all of this stuff?
So there was a case in New Zealand.
That's going to go to him if you don't do anything, or her, or whatever.
In New Zealand, it happened. A woman passed away and she had separated but not yet divorced from her husband. So he was still technically her spouse, because you obviously can't file for divorce until you've been separated for 2 years. In that 2-year time frame, she'd moved in with her sister and was living with her sister, but she didn't have children and both of her parents had passed away. So under the Act, the person who was entitled to receive in that instance is your spouse. So the ex-husband received everything. They had the highest standing. And I mean, the sister can go fight that, but that's not a cheap fight, and you can guarantee that person would have wanted the sister, to have her assets and have her things, not an ex-spouse.
Yeah.
But
and do they want to bankroll? Do you have the money to bankroll that kind of, because that's not going to be cheap. It's going to be a long,
you're looking
drawn
at,
out thing.
$10,000 just to start, that's not going to be here's a $2,000 bill and we've got it all sorted. Like, you're bankrolling that before, and there's no guarantee either, So I'm like, separating, very key to update. And
I see that with insurance too.
Yes.
Where people
Policies,
don't do.
Yeah.
And policy ownership. So, for people that don't know, but you can have, joint policy owners. And the thing with insurance is that both parties have to sign everything. So they have to sign together that they are separating the policy. And so you both have to agree. And this can sometimes form part of the separation agreement, because it can take a lot of time and effort to get this done. But there's also situations where one party just says, well, screw it, I'm going to pay for this insurance, because if you die, I get the benefit of it. So I'm not going to do it. But then what invariably happens to that person who's trying to break out of this, they've already got life insurance there. And if they're going to apply for more life insurance, this is already stuff that's in place. And the insurance company looks at that and says, well, you've already got $1 million worth of life insurance. We're only willing to give you another 500,000 or 2 million or whatever. Yeah. So you can't just say, well, I'm just going to go get a new one, because there's limits within the insurance space as to how they can look at that. So then you're trying to go through this process of splitting up a policy. And I've had a couple of those situations, and it's very hard. At one point I was working at a different firm, but we were I was talking to the husband and the wife in the beginning, just trying to sort stuff out. And then I was getting both sides of everything. Then eventually I said to my colleague, I was like, look, you deal with the wife and I deal with the husband. That way we're not crossing our wires and saying stuff that we probably shouldn't be saying to the other party, because now you have to be cognizant of privacy and making sure that you're not saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. So we ended up having to split that. And I think eventually, probably it took 9 months total to get that to split. And he was just like, he had the money to pay for it. And he was just like, I'm just going to pay. I don't really care.
Yeah.
And she was like, but I just want to go get this other insurance and I can't do it. And he's like, she just felt trapped. And it's tough. So you need to make sure that you sort this stuff out.
Yeah. Make that part of the agreement. Don't sign anything else until you get that sorted. Do you still find, because I know it used to be a thing, maybe not so much now, where you're saying it's more joint, but because I know I've seen instances where people own the policy on each other. So like there's two different policies. Is that more common these days or not really?
Normally you do joint ownership.
Okay.
Like where you own a policy on someone else would be more around, say, like a business owning a policy where you like a key person in the business. So the business is paying for it and they should be getting the benefit if something happens. That's generally we see it. I think when it's people, it's joint policy ownership is like the de facto way of doing it.
The most common, yeah.
Some advisors might do it that way. I don't think it's really like most advisors probably wouldn't be doing it now. There is also another form of policy ownership, which is nominated beneficiaries.
Yes, yep.
And I think it's only Astron Life at the moment that does nominated beneficiaries, because there's a legal dispute as to whether
you can
nominated beneficiaries actually bypasses the will or not. And full disclosure, I used to work for Astron Life, so this was a very a big discussion. But Astron had lawyers look at that backwards and forwards any way possible, and I think the agreement was that it's pretty airtight and it's not contestable. But it makes nominated beneficiary makes life a lot easier, because in that situation where you do split up, you can just say, I'm just taking on my ex-partner, fill out a form, sign it, and it's done. So it has a lot of benefits to it, especially in that situation. But it's also if you talking to a client, you can't say to them, well, I think a nominated beneficiary system is better, because if something happens, because that's just not that's not an appropriate conversation to be having at that time.
No, it's interesting. I've been thinking about that concept as well a bit, where you do nominate somebody and it is bypassing the will, which, I think, they've obviously had people look at it in depth to say, yes, we can go down this path. And I think, then it just becomes, there potentially is relationship property claims and things like that. But again, somebody's having to go argue all of those things.
Yeah.
It's not it's a guarantee, here's I'm going to be able to be successful under this.
Yeah. I mean, I think this was under at the time QC counsel. That's kind of it's not just a lawyer sitting in the office thinking
you're not making a decision like that lightly.
I think at one point there was some discussion from one insurance provider saying that they don't believe that the nominated beneficiary system was airtight, and it kind of created this thing in the market that
you're always going to get two
is.
people arguing though. I think I always say that to people, there would be if everything was just black, I don't believe anything's black and white. Even the law will say one thing, but there's going to be two ways to argue it, so you're going to get one person who's a QC saying, yep, this is the position, and you'll get a competing person who says this is the position. People are always going to find two different sides to argue from that perspective. Nothing is that black and white.
No, I think it's it's black or white, and it's how big is the gray in the middle? Sometimes it's only very skinny and there's a very small chance, and sometimes it's a wide gap and it's it's maybe not so black and white, and that there's this big change. But I think, the nominated beneficiary system is actually quite good, because you can just update stuff quite easily, whereas policy ownership, also policy ownership goes, if it's a couple, it will go directly to the spouse or whoever the other policy owner is. If you've got a nominated beneficiary system, you can set it up so it's 50% goes to the spouse, 25% goes to child one, and 25% goes. So you can do it that way, which is sometimes a lot easier, but also, it bypasses the wall, so it's easy. But you still need to stay on top of it. It's another extra thing to think about on top of
everything else.
This else. I
was just going to turn my mind to, I think life insurance can be a really good thing for blended families, where their asset might be their main home, but they still want to provide their kids for a little bit. I think, to me, I'm always to people, well, what's your asset base? You can only do, what you want. I think a lot of people think, oh, but I'd like more, and then I can do this. And it's well, you can't. But I also think, life insurance is a good one where if you do own it on yourself and you are in a blended family structure, it might be that your current partner gets, a life or a limited life interest in the home, but your life insurance policy might be able to give your children, that little bit of cash injection where you feel comfortable because you're still providing for them while they're not going to get, potentially the bulk asset until your then current partner. It's such a hard, so many people I want to do that, and then other people kids are greedy, and it's each to their own.
Yeah, but I think
It's
life
trying to work
insurance is
with
like
each person's wishes.
Yeah, it's trying to figure out that like middle ground as to what happens. And, like if your family's pretty easy and set up, it's okay. But like in blended families, you're 100% correct.
Yeah.
Like there's situations where, well, you can't just say, well, sell the house,
Yeah.
right? As an example, or,
Yeah.
like how do you make sure that your kids get a certain amount of money as well, and without getting everything tied in and people getting pissed off about how things are getting separated. Like you can make it quite easy and nice and buttoned down and saying like this amount of money I know is going there, and the rest can kind of sort itself out over a number of years.
Yeah.
And that's a much more elegant solution to the problem than fighting, because I think a lot of this stuff always ends up in fighting from my experience. As soon as there's anything that's like a little bit out of what people are expecting, and everyone has their own expectation, they start fighting and they start saying, well, I deserve this because I did this and this and this for dad, and he should have given me this, or he promised me on this like boat trip that no one else was at. We were fishing on a lake and he said like this, he's going to give me all of this. Like now, how do you prove that? And how do you like, and if you're the person saying that to someone, you should be taking the responsibility to talk to someone like you and saying, I've told my son that I'm going to give him X, Y, and Z, and so I want it written down.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And then you're just causing fights.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some parents that do that on purpose, but hopefully not.
Yeah, you'd like to think not. Gosh. You do have ones where, I've had situations where a parent's like cut the other child out of a will, due to quite legitimate reasons, and that's all fleshed out, during that conversation and things like that. But then, they've come back to me 6 months later going, I'm updating and I'm including them again because, the person that wasn't excluded said, I don't want to deal with that. Like, I'm going to be the one that has to face you cutting them out, go put them back in. Even if you don't want to, I don't care. I don't want it all because I don't want to deal with that fight.
Yeah, because that is challengeable if you like cut out one of your kids, right?
Yeah.
It's like something you have to really motivate as to why you've done it, right?
So like if you just chose not to mention anything, like you're definitely open to being challenged. The sort of advice or the recommended position is you'd put in, acknowledge in your will why you've excluded them. So rather than just pretending they don't exist, you highlight the fact that they have been excluded and you've turned your mind to this to sort of show evidence. It can still be challenged, but those sort of provisions, depending on the reasoning and all those type of things that will come into it and your circumstances and things like that. But if you've done that right, the chances of it being challenged, I think, are substantially reduced versus if you just do nothing and just pretend that Timmy doesn't exist. We've just cut him out. But if you say, Timmy's been excluded because A, B, C, D, then the chances, and then when Timmy wants to challenge, he's going to get that advice as well from a lawyer saying, you're going to go to 100 different lawyers and, some will say it's not worth it and some's always going to say, yep, we can argue it. Like, that's why we have, the court of
appeal, I'll go for it.
all of those things. Yeah, I'm going to argue this. If that's what you want to do, let's do it. But they're also going to get the advice of saying, but they've acknowledged this. So that's going to be, a hurdle. They might still say, yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah.
But again, you've got to have somebody willing to fund it and all those type of things. It's not like any of that stuff is free. Like,
no.
You're looking at thousands and thousands of legal fees when it's getting to that point, not just...
And months of fights. Years, potentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
My previous life, I was an accountant and I worked in a accounting firm, and we had an estate that had been going for, I want to say like 20 years, because there was so much infighting. There was a lot of money in there, and there was so much fighting and going backwards and forwards between courts. Like their file was such a stack for every year just because of all the stuff going out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was quite. It can go on for a long time.
I had one. It wasn't an infighting situation, but even just like something that you can include in a will, like talking about the accounting factor. Like I came across when I was practicing like a set of financials for a trust, and there was this debt to a man, and it was like 25 years old, and it was like 635,000 that the trust owed this man, but he passed away, which he was one of the settlors, so it's not like a random person. But in the will, it never just had a simple I forgive any debt owing to me on my passing, which just clears up the accounting ledger nice and tidy. But that wasn't in the will. So, and the estate had been closed, technically it should be still open because it's waiting on that debt to be paid by the trust. But that just turned into like I'm going to say the fee on that ended up being like 6 or 7 times what I would have charged for a will where you would have just included that provision. And I mean, the will was probably drafted years ago and things like that. Like, it was probably like by the time you had to draft all the documents to tick the accounting box, to tick the legal box, and then I think in that instance as well, the executor had died on the will as well. So it's not like like it was
complicated.
Yeah, where it could have literally been, one paragraph, one sentence saying, I forgive all the debt owing to me between the trust.
And all sorted and squared off.
Yeah. But that sat there on the books for like 25, 30 years. And I was like, what? And I was reviewing them going, what's this about? And then reached out and they're like, oh, it's just sat there and we've just left it. And like, we should probably tidy this up.
Yeah, someone should probably do something about this. Yeah. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess we've been going for a while.
Yeah.
So I think, what is one big takeaway that you would think that people should take away from our conversation in terms of, wills or succession or whatever you kind of think?
I would say my biggest takeaway is sort of take an active step in your own life. Nobody's ever going to do all this stuff for you. You and I can sit there and tell people about the benefits and things like that. But at the end of the day, a person actually needs to take responsibility for themselves and their family and their loved ones and take those steps to make it easier, whether it is putting the right insurance, having the right insurance in place, having a will in place, having EPAs done. It actually all comes down to the person. Like, my biggest takeaway is if you've taken anything from this, take an active role in your own life and take those steps, because you can get advice to help you and all those things, but you actually are the decision maker. You're the person that needs to take that first step to kind of getting it all sorted.
Yeah, 100%. I would, the one thing I would say to add on to that is that people need to kind of just suck it up and face their own mortality. Yeah. That's the first step to taking the action.
Yeah.
So you need to kind of suck that up and deal with it and then go through and do all the action. I think that's definitely, but action is required.
Yeah.
Don't sit there and dilly-dally. Talk to someone.
Yeah.
Whether it's you or me about insurance or anyone else, reach out to an advisor or lawyer and talk to them. Like, it's super, super, super important for you and your family.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode and gained some useful insights. If you found it helpful, please share it with someone who might benefit from it too. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find details to connect with today's guests in the show notes. And remember, the information shared here is for educational purposes only. For personalized support, reach out to a qualified financial advisor or appropriate professional. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time on Building Sense for Life.